Hi, Dr. Steve Thompson again. This is Ethics Chapter 10. This one is in reference to ethics and the war on terrorism. So we live in somewhat of a new world when it comes to active shooters. Active shooters have been going on since a very, very long time. Our response to them as law enforcement has changed significantly. One of the first, we'll say, more famous ones was back in 1983 in San Ysidro, California, at a McDonald's, where a man went in and started shooting people, locked the doors where people couldn't get out, shot, I think, as young as an infant on up to a 70-year-old man. It killed 20 some odd people, if I remember, memory serves correct. The response at the time was to surround and conquer. They sent hundreds of law enforcement, surrounded the area, helicopters. It was just a massive undertaking of law enforcement who just stood outside. It's what they were trained to do: surround, conquer, whatever. And it ended up almost heroically stating on the news that the commander authorized the taking of a sniper shot from a block away. And so a sniper put a bullet through the window, killing the hostage taker, but not until he had methodically and systematically killed a lot more people. We didn't learn our lesson from that one. And I'm talking about this on terrorism part because I do believe active shooters are domestic terrorists. That's my personal opinion. May not fall in line with the technical definition. Later on, we've had Columbine, where the officers kind of did the same thing. They sat outside and didn't go in with children bleeding to death. And that was kind of short after that era. That was kind of when I came into law enforcement, and we learned our lessons, or we were supposed to have learned our lessons, but we didn't. We didn't as much as we should have, we'll say. We had the Virginia Tech shooting after that, and the officers went straight in, and he still killed 19 some odd people at a university in Virginia. But they went in very quickly. The officers placed themselves at risk and handled the threat as quickly as possible, but still a lot of people got killed. So that was a good example of how law enforcement should respond. You had Newtown, Connecticut, where 20 plus school children and teachers were killed. The officers immediately went in and stopped the damage from getting worse. It's still a massive amount of damage, but they were able to kill the hostage taker, or I think he may have killed himself. I can't remember. Then you have Uvalde, Texas, which is more recent, one of the most recent. The officers did the surround and conquer thing again, waiting on a SWAT team, and then systematically went in, killing the hostage taker after they had an overwhelming show of force. They have a video of a Texas state trooper outside the school on her on a body cam saying, one of the officers says, "Is your kid in that school?" And the answer was, "No, my kid's not in that school. If my kid was in there, I'd be in there already." So that's where we see a disconnect in how to respond to an act of terror and cowardice that can sometimes be shown in law enforcement. So my message to all the cops that I teach, and I teach roughly 100 every year, that's in the police academy, and then I lose track of how many students in the universities that I teach. If you decide to become a police officer, you have already made the conscious decision to put yourself in harm's way. That may result in you running into a gunfight with only your sidearm and multiple shooters with multiple long guns. And if they're actively shooting children, as they were in Uvalde, or if the children and the teachers are actively bleeding to death and dying, and the only thing stopping them is you, the only thing stopping you from getting to them is the shooter, you go in, even though you may die. That's a decision you have to make before you put on the badge. And that's a promise you've made to your community. There's a reason the community calls you heroes. It's because you made that decision already, and you will go in. In Uvalde, they failed. Parents were going into the school and rescuing their children. In fact, there's even talk of one woman being prosecuted because she disregarded the police barricades and went in and got children out. She was a hero where the police were cowardice. Enough information's come out. I can say this information unequivocally, and it's a sad state of affairs that we rely on our police, and we couldn't get them to do what they did in Connecticut, in Virginia, and a lot of the the attempted mass shootings that we've had in the past. So I start that with our war on terrorism. So my point there is, if you're going to be in law enforcement, you've already made that decision. I probably told you this already. If not, I'm going to say it again. I ask all my cadets in the police academy to raise their hand if they've been taught that the priority, your number one priority is to go home at the end of your shift. And a bunch of them raise their hand because they've been taught that. And I tell them, if your number one priority is to go home at the end of your shift, then if there is an active shooter at a school where children are being murdered, the best thing for you to do is to go the other direction. Go have lunch somewhere, go relax, call in sick, whatever. It's not to be a police officer. So anybody who still has your hand up, if you believe your number one priority is to go home at the end of your shift, please hang up your badge, hand it in. You are not a police officer. You are a sheep, and that sheep is not a bad thing, but we have sheep dogs, and our job, I'm a sheepdog, is to protect the flock. It's to protect the sheep who cannot protect themselves. So, and sheepdogs are not just police officers. There's citizens who will stand up and do the right thing. There are teachers who are in the classroom getting shot and shield their children with their own bodies. Those are sheepdogs. And then you have the wolf. The wolf is what we fight. And so if you're not willing to go after that wolf and put your own life at risk, get out of law enforcement. I've seen cowardice police officers myself personally, and we've seen it in Uvalde. We've seen it. It was almost a policy to show cowardice. We don't go in until the SWAT team gets here. Well, I was a SWAT team. We can't. It takes us a long time to get set up. We don't have that much time. So sometimes it has to happen. So if your number one priority in law enforcement is go home at the end of your shift, there's a lot of jobs out there that are safe. Work from home. You can do like blogging or whatever, but being a police officer is not for you. I'll get off of that rant. Terrorism. Defining terrorism, you basically have violence to influence a population. It can be religious, it can be monetary. Typically, depending on the circumstances, you have Muslim extremists who do things like the 9/11 bombers or the 9/11 hijackers. They were, Muslim extremists who didn't like U.S. policy and what the things that the United States had done in different parts of the world. Okay, and then you have narco-terrorism, which is economic terrorism. It's basically narco-terrorists don't go kill people just to kill people. They kill people to influence the population so they can further their drug activities and get more money. That's simple. They would, if they're going to come over here and kidnap people, they're going to do that for money. If they're going to kill a police officer and his family, they're going to do that too. So the next police officer and his family won't be so enthusiastic about going after him. I think there was a drug cartel raid, and there's a bunch of soldiers, and they just raided this drug cartel house. And one of the officers, it was in one of the Central American countries, was killed, and the local government, the city and the mayor, the governor, whoever it was, they hailed this officer as a hero, and they identified this officer, not knowing that he's dead. There's nothing else can be done to him, not knowing what the response would be, and they burned his wife and children alive to send the message to the next one. That's terrorism. That's narco-terrorism. So we have our government in the USA, especially, we have to understand the difference between the government and the police and the military. The military is for combat. The number one thing that a soldier does when he goes into the military, and I was in the military for 6 years, the first thing we learn how to do is to kill. That's the primary objective. Your job in the military is to hand out supplies, uniforms, is to put on a soldier to go kill somebody, or is to put on a soldier to go get gas to take people to go kill somebody. It's if you flip burgers in the military, you're flipping burgers to cook for the people to make it possible to go out and kill, whether it's logistics or whatever. But the primary purpose of the military is violence and killing, to take care of an enemy. Just the mere existence of a strong military can deter some countries from or deter countries from coming in. Nobody's coming to the USA and attacked us since Pearl Harbor because we have an extremely strong and capable military. I don't think it's going to be a long time for anybody comes here. We have the largest and most powerful military, or at least the most effective military in the world. So, but military versus law enforcement, civilian law enforcement officers police a civilian population. The primary objective is not to kill. The primary objective is to respect rights and enforce the law. So there's a difference, but sometimes there can be some overlap. And criminals have become more emboldened and their weapon systems have become more effective. You know, the availability of a shoulder-fired, high-capacity, high-powered rifle, which is the weapon of choice for every single military on the planet for infantry. It's a shoulder-fired rifle. That's automatic, either fully or semi. Most of them just use them on semi because it is more effective that way. But you have a 30-round magazine, you drop a mag, you reload it. That's literally what every single military in the world uses as their primary infantry weapon. So that weapons platform is available in the USA very easily. You can just walk to your local store, academy, Dick's Sporting Goods, your local gun store, your sporting goods store, and you can a local pawn shop, and you can pick up that platform. And again, it is very effective. A lot of our active shooters buy them right before they actually go out and commit their or do their shootings. So our law enforcement have had to respond to that. That response is more weapons, more training, more body armor, more types, more types of armored vehicles, stuff like that. So there's been, the bank robbery in California, the famous one that kind of inspired. Now, pretty much every law enforcement officer in the country either has access to a long gun, either a shotgun or the more preferably for most officers, the AR-15 platform, the a version of the M16 that's been used in the USA since before Vietnam. All right. With that availability of that platform, it becomes harder to take out a target. That's why officers are carrying them now and being trained on them as well. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the PowerPoint for this. I just want to jump to torture. So when we talk about terrorism and or torture in any context, the morality of it. So a formalist would say any torture is bad, period. It violates the rules. But a utilitarianist might say, well, it might be okay to torture somebody if you get the information you need. So, the USA had a practice of waterboarding detainees, I think, in Guantanamo Bay and other places, Afghanistan, Iraq, for trying to get information that would save American lives, and they justified that. They didn't call it torture. I think they call that enhanced interrogation, whatever you want to call it. We'll switch to torture, pulling out fingernails, stabbing people, extreme physical pain to try to get them to give you information. It just comes down to conflicting ethical theories. Would a virtuous person allow a person to be tortured to save another 100 people? And and for me personally, I would say if I know this person has the information that will save 100 people, 1,000 people, whatever, I personally would be willing to allow that to happen or do it myself. That's, that may conflict with a formalist who would say, no, it's never okay. It sacrifices who we are, and that is definitely a valid argument. So a formalist would say never. A utilitarianist would say, yeah, that's great if you get the information, and a virtuous person would know which decision to make in the right circumstances. So torture is not, I wish it was a perfect line in the sand, but I know a person, her name's Captain Cinnamon Salvador. She's the Academy Director at the Calcasieu Sheriff's Training Academy. We've had these discussions on ethics, and I'll use one of her scenarios that she uses when she's teaching. A community of people is escaping from a combat zone. The soldiers in the area are executing everybody that they see, men, women, and children, and including raping the women. If they are found, they will die, and they will die. The men will be executed immediately, the children will be beat to death, and the women will be raped before they're murdered. There's a crying baby. They're within 100 meters of the enemy, and if they hear the crying baby, they all die. And one of the people decides to kill the baby to stop the baby from screaming. Baby doesn't know. Baby doesn't understand. It's not the baby's fault. It's not the mother's fault. But they have to choose, sacrifice the baby or they all die. And, I'm not saying, and I'm not advocating killing the baby. I'm just saying that's an ethical dilemma is not an easy choice. If it's an easy choice, it's not an ethical dilemma. Like this pen, it's my pen. Well, let me do this one. This one has a message from my wife on it. It's very important to me. So if you were to know this pen was very important to me, and there's two pens here, and I say you can have this pen and you can take it with you and keep it forever, and consider it my gift. But this pen that my wife gave me with my initials on it and her initials on it, that was a birthday present. This is very important to me. So it's real easy. If you take this one, it's not an ethical dilemma. You're just a garbage human being who's doing something bad. There's no ethical dilemma in which pen to choose. Take the one that I gave to you, say you could have, and say thank you and move on about your life. Ethical dilemmas are hard choices. Like, do you kill the baby to save 100 people, or do you let the baby cry, the enemy detects where you are, and the baby dies and the 100 people die both? A formalist would have to say, can't kill the baby. Can never kill the baby. The baby's innocent. Utilitarianists would say, you're going to have to do it to save the rest, because the outcome is automatically everybody dies, even the baby that's crying. And a virtuous person it would have a hard decision to make. All right, so that's my torture and a speech there. We're going to move on to targeted killing and the militarization of law enforcement. So targeted killing is essentially, should we target people, as in, and this is usually in the consideration of foreign persons, not usually in the USA. And I'll come back to law enforcement and whether we should kill a target that's not ready for it or whatever. But for instance, President Obama sent in Navy SEALs to kill Osama bin Laden. That was a targeted killing. Maybe he had some kind of option to take him into custody, but they didn't. They went ahead and killed him. That's a targeted killing of a wanted fugitive from America who had assisted in the killing of thousands of Americans. So they killed him. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That depends. A utilitarianist would say he's out and he can no longer kill anybody else. A utilitarianist could also say if they would have captured him and put him in prison, he would not be considered a martyr, and maybe nobody would step in his shoes after he's been killed. We don't know. A formalist would say it's legal to kill him. He's wanted, dead or alive, and any resistance whatsoever, and a virtuous person would make the right decision. Let's go back to law enforcement as it pertains to, we'll say, targeted killing. So I'm going to go back to active shooter. I do train police officers that active shooter is, it is a civilian law enforcement mission, but it is a form of combat, and the rules change a little bit. I say change a little bit; they change a lot. For instance, let's say an officer goes into a active shooter situation. He's got 2 officers with him. Luckily, he has backup and didn't have to go in alone. He's killing people, and as the murder takes place, as the suspect is killing people, the officer steps in and fires a shot at the suspect. The suspect realizes, oh, I'm about to die, but I don't want to die. I just wanted to kill a bunch of children, we'll say, at a high school. I want to be famous and I want to be on TV. And so he throws his weapon down and throws his hands up in the air. Okay, so he's no longer, this one person is no longer a threat. And with that said, would the officer be justified in shooting that person after he had shown that he wanted to give up? And there's only 2 officers present. And so there's a lot to think about there. Most people are thinking, oh yeah, as soon as he gives up, the rules are you can't use deadly force on a surrendering suspect. Well, if you switch to combat, if a person is firing at you in combat, and let's say we went to war with North Korea, Russia, Iran, whoever, if a enemy soldier was shooting at us, and they decided they ran out of ammunition, or they realized they were about to be overrun, so they throw their hands up in the air, and we're aggressing, as in closing in on them, and then at the last minute they're like, okay, I lost, and then they throw their hands up. The rules of engagement in the military are you are allowed to kill the target, even though the soldiers are at that point surrendering. Now, that's because that one soldier is surrendering, you don't have time to take a POW at that point, and you got other soldiers that are in the battle to worry about. You need to kill that soldier, even though he's got his hands up, because if you spend your time dealing with him, then your fellow soldiers are getting killed by somebody else when you need to just kill that target and then move on to the next one. Now, once you go through, everybody surrendered, the battle is over, and you realize you've got someone there are no more threats, and the person surrenders, who's, we'll say, injured and has a bullet hole in the leg, but they're still more than likely to survive. Tanks are rolling in. Okay, that person's not going to be killed. That person would be taken as a POW and given medical care in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. But let's switch that to a high school. You have 1 or 2 or 3 or however many shooters are there, or the officer doesn't know how many shooters are there. The person decides at the last minute to give up when they realize their enemy, which is the children that they're shooting, are no longer their primary enemy. Their enemy is the police officer who actually have the ability to shoot back. This is the definition of a bully. Go after somebody who can't fight back. Well, then the soldiers, the active shooter, they give up. But does a law enforcement officer have to stop? And I guess that's a moral question. If I were put in that situation and I were not 100% sure that was the one and only shooter, and it was just myself and or one other officer, I think it would be justified to treat that as a combat situation, because we need this threat stopped, even though it appears to be giving up, to move on to the next threat that could be actively shooting more children. Sorry, I don't have time to deal with you right now. I need you incapacitated, and the best way to incapacitate somebody is to kill them quickly, put them in stop their heart, stop their brain from functioning, and then move on to the next one. And this is just one of the scenarios that has to be considered in an active shooter situation. Is this combat, or is this a civilian law enforcement response? And in my personal opinion, when you're talking about killing children, innocent children who can't fight back, I think it's more of a combat terrorism situation where the asset of a law enforcement officer trained in combat is different than a traditional, just standard military response. So with that said, I know somebody's going to look at this and maybe say, oh, well, he's encouraging shooting people with their hands up. No, I'm encouraging someone who is just killed multiple targets, multiple children, multiple people at a school, multiple people at a grocery store, and then they decide at the very last second to give up. And because they're engaged in a gun battle with somebody who can actually fight back, and we're not 100% sure that there's not more than one shooter, and we don't have enough personnel to deal with that person, place them in handcuffs, so forth and so on, I think shooting that target, moving towards the front line, like as in combat, as in moving to the next shooter, whether that shooter existed or not, would be a viable option. And I don't see how that could result in an indictment or criminal charges against an officer, or even the consideration of a violation of constitutional right. So the active shooter puts themselves in that situation. They want to be in a gunfight, and it is a combat situation. It's not the traditional law enforcement. It's not we'll say the guy that gets out of the car and pulls a knife on an officer. Okay, the officer pulls his gun, fires one shot, the knife drops, the guy goes to his knees and gives up. Okay, that's a whole lot different than more of a combat scenario. So the morality of it, is what would a virtuous person do? Would a virtuous person consider another shooter is there that might be killing other children to deal with this one single person? A virtuous person would have to make that decision. A utilitarianist, if he shot and continued to shoot even though the suspect was given up and there was no other shooter, that would be a bad outcome. It'd be, well, he didn't really have to shoot him. He could have faced justice. But that's not the outcome. A formalist would say, is it within the rules? And I really don't know. But we keep getting more and more active shooters, and I suspect that this could be an issue in the future. And I guess my question to you is, there's a concept out there of what does this person deserve? So we don't give police the authority to give people what we think they deserve. Somebody smarts off to a police officer. They slap a teenager gets out with just a bad attitude, smarts off to the cop. The police slap the kid. Some people out there would look at it and go, that kid needed slapping. He deserved it. But we don't give the police that authority to give people what they deserve. We give people constitutional rights, and they must abide by those. So there's only one group out there that can decide what someone deserves. And so, for instance, at the end of I've seen a lot of cases where people get beat up and they say, oh, well, if he would have just complied, then he wouldn't have got beat up at the end of the pursuit. I've seen people get beat to death at the end of a pursuit. Completely unconstitutional. The only group that can decide whether he deserved it and the punishment that he got is the jury. The officer can and should be charged with the crime of brutality, deprivation of rights under color of law, and then the jury can decide, well, you know what, the guy deserved it. I've seen murder cases go. The person committed a second-degree murder, period. Planned a murder, walked into church, literally, killed a man in the front of the church while he was preaching, and the only option was, convince the jury that it was necessary or that he deserved it, and that's what the jury found. The jury found the person not guilty. It's a famous, relatively famous case out of Lake Charles, Louisiana. So with that said, that's my last of chapter 10. We'll see you in chapter 11.